So mental maps of reality are basically these things that we build in our head that are maps, not in a geographic sense, but they guide our thought processes, that kind of are a reflection of our normative views of what kinds of people and things exist. So these are going to be predicated on what experiences you've had and who you've encountered. So if you've had, if you've traveled a lot and if you've encountered a lot of different kinds of people, your mental maps of reality are going to look different than somebody who lives in a small town and has never met anyone that is very different from them. So, I mean, if you think about the number of things that we touch, interact with, or see or hear on a daily basis, the world is presenting us with a lot of data that our brain needs to sift through and figure out what's pertinent to our survival, what's helpful for us to learn from and implement, and from an evolutionary perspective, and what can we kind of ignore because it seems like a one-off or superfluous or something like that. So our brains kind of their job is to try and keep us alive by almost jumping to conclusions, to trying to figure out like shortcuts that represent patterns in our lives so that we can get from A to B a lot quicker. So our brains create these shortcuts or these mental maps that take all of our experiences and kind of organize it into basically like what I've got on the screen, right? You've got all your experiences in the past. Your brain kind of organizes them, figures out what are the pertinent patterns so that it can quickly deduce things in the future. So mental maps organize our world. They help us understand the things that we're going through, the phenomena around us. But they are definitely shaped through enculturation. So if you were raised in a particular church, you might not think that transgender individuals exist. You might think that that is a mental health issue. That's not true. I just want to preface that and say, that's not true. That people are transgender. That is a normal way of being, and we will never invalidate that in any anthropology class. But depending on the way that you're raised, you're gonna have these beliefs about people and what's right, what's wrong, what exists, what doesn't. And your mental maps will reflect that. So mental maps have two giant important functions for you. Number one, the first function is that they classify reality. So everything from units of time. So we think about, 24 hours in the day, we have different time zones. That's a construct that humans placed on top of the world to try and, agree at what time, at what point are we all going to meet at this place and do this thing. We had to have a way to reference that. So our mental map needed some sort of temporary or temporal time related thing excuse me in it that we could agree to do that thing at that time and we could coordinate. So also, things like what is considered a food. Some of us don't eat, bugs regularly, but in many other cultures they do. But since that's not something we often see, we don't put it into our mental map of reality of what kinds of foods are acceptable to eat. We don't see it. We don't need to eat it. So we see it as different or gross, but it's totally normalized for other people. So often these mental maps are a reflection of who is in power. So for instance, who determines our units of measurement? Because if I can go out in in my daily basis, if I want to use meters, kilometers, I can. The metric system, I can use it in my home, but our standard for our country is not that, right? It's imperial units. And I didn't decide that. Honestly, I think the imperial unit system is very stupid. It is not intuitive at all. Um, but I didn't decide that. Somebody in power decided we were going to use those, and we're not going to change that. And we are one of a few countries in the entire world that still use imperial units, and we've just refused to change our ways. So it's what, when you get this insight into our nation or our culture, you're getting an insight into what does the group in power think is appropriate and right. So a culture creates a concept like time, and we divide it arbitrarily. So another example of this are borders. Borders are arbitrary. They're imaginary lines drawn in the sand that are highly negotiated, highly contested, are defended, but they are arbitrary. They don't exist now. I mean, while a mountain range itself might exist and divide two places, the actual line that we call border between two states or two countries doesn't exist in reality. We put it there as a way to organize and understand interactions and behaviors and predict if I ship something across this border, do I know what the tariffs are going to look like? So it gives us a way to organize and understand our world. So all of these things like time, monetary units, distance, all of these things are assumed to be scientific, universal, and natural. But things like seconds, days, weeks, meters, those are all human constructs that we've created to help us understand our world in a more quick, fast-paced, efficient way. So, mental maps of reality can become problematic when people treat cultural notions of difference and distinctness as being something that is biologically natural or scientifically natural. So, race is a key example. A lot of people don't understand that race on a biological basis is not detectable. It's not real in that way. It's not biologically real. We make it real when we treat people differently, when we use micro racism or direct racism to marginalize people. We make it a real thing, but biologically and naturally, it's not. Racial categories do not correlate to biological differences. Here in the US, we recognize a few races, but in Brazil, they've got like 500 plus racial classifications. It's a lot more fluid, flexible, and system over there. So also things like gender. We tend to look at the world in a binary that, there's males and females, and we perceive them in a certain way and expect them to dress a certain way. But it's totally natural in other places to have more genders than just two, to have 5 or 7 recognized genders on a national level or on a cultural level. So it's not fair when people say, well, you're either a boy or a girl. That is the conception here, but that is by no means the natural conception of the world because humans are so diverse. If you're trying to narrow humans down to boxes, it's never going to be neat. It's never going to be pretty. And it's never going to be scientifically true. We do not fit in racial boxes. We do not fit into sex boxes. There's not just males and females. People can have more than just XX or XY chromosomes, despite what you learned in high school. They can have different genetic differences that suppress testosterone or estrogen, even if their chromosomes are XXXY. And they can have a presentation of genitals genitals inside you, but also exterior. So all of your reproductive organs can occur in any range. So it is too simplified. Humans are too diverse to simplify them and put them in these tiny little boxes and expect things to be neat. That's not how it works. So these mental maps of reality, they are fallible. They are not truth. They are your brain taking your subjective experiences. Maybe you've never met someone who is LGBTQIA plus. Maybe you've never met somebody who is queer. And so your brain hasn't yet had to figure out how they fit into your world. So your mental maps of reality just pretty much work on how you were enculturated, your values that you get from people around you and your parents and things like that. And also, what have you come into contact with? If you've never experienced something, then your brain doesn't need to account for that thing. So we have, one thing that helps. This is why diversity is important. So your mental map can become more factual, more reflective of the actual world that you live in that is highly complex. So, second important function of mental maps are that they assign meaning to what has already been classified. So, for example, we tend to divide our lifespan, the human lifespan, into categories. We've got infant, child, adolescent, teenager, young adult, adult, and then our seniors or our silver sneakers, right? But then we assign some different values to those groups. We don't treat all of those groups the same. Some of those groups carry more respect. So when people say respect your elders, they're respecting the life that they lived before you and they've accumulated knowledge. And this is something that is largely shared across cultures that we recognize that elders have more knowledge than those of us that haven't, lived quite as long. And we should defer to them because they have more experience. If we don't learn from somebody else's mistakes, we're just going to keep, making the same mistakes forever. Some of these age groups have more legal rights or more privileges. So, for instance, you can't drive I think you can do it at 15 with a permit and a person, right? But, you can't drive on your own till like 16. You can't vote until you're 18. You can't buy alcohol till you're 21. Can't rent a car on your own until you're 25. So these groups have, as you go through life and you get older and older, you get more rights assigned to you because society perceives you differently. They're like, oh, your frontal lobe is finally developing. Great, we can give you some more rights. Now, however, it is worth wondering why at 18, you are able to go enlist in the military and die for your country. So you're considered old enough for that, responsible and mature enough for that, but you are not considered responsible enough to drink alcohol. So these are subjective, right? It's an abstract, it's a subjective thing that we imposed on our population to control how people go about their lives, and it is worth critiquing it. And I mean this for everything. Critique my class. Don't just take everything I'm saying for granted. Go look it up yourself. But I promise you that I will not make a claim in this class that is not backed by scientific evidence. That, for instance, when I say sex is more than two categories, is more than a binary, 100% that is factually true based on biological research, regardless of whether it fits your belief system or not. So, mental maps of reality are not real. They are fake things that we construct in our brains to understand the world around us, and we reduce it to patterns that are relevant to us. But again, it is not reflective of actual real life things.